following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
So without something like that, without something like a search engine, a query and indexing system to be able to find things across the internet, it would not be possible to be where we are today. And I think the graph is going to represent that, but for Web3.
GRTiQ podcast.
We are like astronauts floating in the space of time, lost between the past and the future.
That is the sound of inevitability.
Welcome to the GRTiQ podcast. Today I'm speaking with Collin O'Brien, marketing manager at Rubic, a multi-chain DeFi ecosystem where users can complete multi-chain swaps utilizing different solutions, along with receiving the best rates from the leading swap protocols, all within one click. During our interview, Collin talks about how he first encountered Bitcoin, his non-technical background and pathway into crypto, what Rubic is and how it works, and his perspective about the future of Web3, DeFi, and the graph. As always, we started the conversation by talking about Collin's educational background.
I did a little bit of time at a 4-year where I was studying engineering as a background, but it just wasn't for me. I wanted to get out there and make an impact on the world and jumped right into sales and marketing.
So what can you share about your professional background? Sounds like you got started in sales and marketing.
Oh, humble beginnings, working in retail to start things off. But over the years, I've done just about every type of sales job you can imagine, from retail box store to door-to-door sales to medical sales, international sales, and even real estate sales. But also worked in marketing divisions of different companies, both small startups and large corporations over the years as well. So about 17, 18 years now of sales and marketing experience.
So let's go back to when you first became aware of crypto. Do you recall when you first became aware and what drew your interest?
Yeah, I actually saw a discussion. I can't remember what website or message board it was on, but it was about Bitcoin. This was way back in 2010. And it was when Bitcoin had gone from a fraction of a penny up to 8 cents. I believe it was after the Popular Mechanics article came out, or maybe it was Wired magazine. I can't remember. But that was kind of what piqued my interest, and I started looking into it. And it was in early 2011 that I almost pulled the trigger on buying at least 1,000 Bitcoin. It was $1.79 at the time. I remember very vividly, but I had enough people in my inner circle of friends and family that convinced me that it would have just been a waste of money. So I've learned since then to trust my gut a little bit more and believe in myself.
2011, 2010, that's a long time ago. A lot has happened in crypto and especially with Bitcoin since then. So you would have been a really early adopter at that stage. What did you see at that time that kind of piqued your interest?
I just remember looking for ways that I could start to establish myself and find footing in the world where it felt like the stock market was out of reach for a younger guy like myself. And I've always just been very attracted to technology itself, right? And it was always something that interested me, being on like the cutting edge of learning all of this new stuff going on. And when I heard cryptographic encryption and digital money, definitely piqued my interest. So that was, I guess, really the thing that turned me on to it at first. But it wasn't until actually many years later, around 2016, that I really dove into understanding what smart contracts were and how, money could essentially be programmable. You could piggyback data and instructions on top of this. And that's what made everything really start to click for me. And that was when I really, in earnest, became involved in the industry.
this isn't uncommon, right? People become interested in crypto because they're interested in the speculative nature of it. But once they discover the technological uses, and in your case, smart contracts, it unlocks something totally different. How would you describe with friends and family what the aha moment is with smart contracts and why they're important?
The aha moment for me, I guess, was I like you said, it's going to be different for everyone else, right? So everyone is going to have their own moment where they truly finally understand it. All I can say is that if you start looking at this less like a far-fetched way to make money or some type of Ponzi scheme, and instead look at it as a new form of accounting, that is the path towards finally having your own aha moment. Because that, in essence, is what this really is it's a new form of accounting. We've been keeping our current system of accounting for thousands of years, and it hasn't been until the last 70, 80 years that we've started to digitize that form of accounting. But only recently were we able to, with our math and logic and coding, able to make it trustless and permissionless. This unlocks a lot of new potential for our system of accounting and for record keeping. And yeah, that's going to be the path, I think, for a lot of people to finally have that aha moment.
Why does the world need a new accounting system? What's wrong with the current one?
The current one is convoluted, obfuscated, prone to corruption, prone to manipulation. This new form of accounting is immutable. It's open. It's decentralized. There's no one individual party controlling all of the flow of value and information. It's something that's open and accessible to everybody. Everyone is on an equal footing. And it is basically, like I said earlier, programmable money. There is a whole new system of business models that can be generated through having this permissionless, trustless environment. We're removing the middlemen everywhere middlemen can be removed. And I think that is important in unlocking the potential for the individual, which is what this entire movement does. It empowers the individual to control their own data, to control their own finances, and participate in the system at their own free will, versus right now where it is very top-down authoritarian.
When you're talking with friends and family who aren't in the space, maybe don't understand it to the level that you do, and they see these headlines, especially over the last couple weeks or couple months, the market's been very tumultuous. How do you explain to them that you're on a mission or involved in something with this incredible vision when there's so much criticism of it?
I remind them that when the internet first started to come about in the 90s, that it experienced very similar pushback because people react in fear, distrust to things that they don't understand. And also change itself can be very scary. And so it's natural for people to have trepidation when we are experiencing such a major shift. And when it comes to our entire financial system and the way in which we structure and organize our data, I can't think of something that would be more disruptive to our lives than that. And so it's a natural response, but it's important, again, to draw upon things that have happened over the course of the last century and recognize that this is, at this point, going to be an inevitability. Pandora's box has been opened. Whether you support this entire movement or not, I think is irrelevant. The technology exists, and it will be used to great benefit.
The GRTiQ podcast is made possible by a generous grant from the Graph Foundation. The Graph Grants program provides support for protocol infrastructure, tooling, dApps, subgraphs, and community building efforts. Learn more at thegraph.foundation. That's thegraph.foundation.
Hi, this is GRTiQ. Thank you for listening to this podcast and for supporting this project. especially those of you who have taken the time to leave a review, rate the podcast, or share an episode on social media. The GRTiQ podcast shines a light on the people working to build the graph, and each week we get to meet a new member of the graph community to hear their story, to get a fresh perspective, and hopefully to learn something new. But the truth about the graph is that it's really about the countless stories happening every single day all across the world, including your story, that will make the difference in the success and evolution of the graph, and ultimately, Web3. You get to write your own story, so if you have the ambition to help build the graph, then take initiative and get involved. Join the Graph's Discord, start reading and contributing to posts in the Graph's forum, join the Graph's Telegram and Reddit channels, apply to become a Graph advocate, or join the Subgraph DAO, and look for ways to make a contribution. They're out there. If I can do it, so can you.
Thank you for your support.
Roger that.
Well, we're talking today, Collin, because you work at Rubic, and Rubic's an interesting new project with a lot of opportunity in the market. For listeners that haven't heard of Rubic yet, how would you explain what Rubic is and what you do there?
Sure. In simple terms, Rubic is a cross-chain swap aggregator. Now, if you are not familiar with the industry, that may sound daunting, but we essentially are taking all of the work that people are doing on all of the different blockchain networks, all of the liquidity that they are accruing, all of the bridge systems that exist between the different networks, and we're merging it all together into one simple software package that applications will be able to use to have native support to be able to move value between blockchain networks. So it would be very similar to if you wanted to convert US dollars into a different currency, you'd have to go through a bank. That's a centralized entity. With Rubic, if you're trying to use value in one currency and an application happens to be on a different network, you're able to use that currency regardless of where it's located, right? Like if you have a tokenized asset that has value, you should be able to use that inside any application that you deem fit. So our goal is to work with different projects, different businesses, to empower their applications to have this type of functionality, this core baseline protocol for Web3, so that people can use cryptocurrency in any environment in the different blockchain networks.
Well, you mentioned business there, and that's one of the things that makes Rubic different, right? When we were preparing for this interview, you talked about how Rubic is focusing on B2B or business-to-business type environments and a lot of Web2 businesses. Talk us through that, because I think that's a differentiator here that's important to set Rubic apart.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of the focus to date has been to draw money into the environment, right? To get people on board with Web3. And so there's been a huge push towards individual users and investors to get them in this environment using these applications and to build the total value of the industry as a whole. Our goal is to focus on what comes next, which is helping businesses be able to support their users in a Web3 environment. So that is that business to business focus that you and I had spoken about. It is, again, empowering a business to provide their applications with a way for their users to use any cryptocurrency that they have inside that application.
It's always helpful for listeners to hear a very clear example. You've provided some context here, but can you share a specific example of how a business or a user of Rubic would interact with it and the value they get by doing that?
Absolutely. I'll just use some very popular applications here that by no means is any signal for partnership or anything like that. But say, for example, and this is just a real world example of how something like this would operate. So in the future, we won't have the centralized server centers that we have now, right? That is the core architecture of Web 2. Web 3 is decentralized and distributed across a network, not one individual device anywhere. It's shared across all devices. So you'll have applications like, for example, Venmo, right? Which currently being housed again on server centers, is across a blockchain network, let's say Avalanche, for example. So Venmo chose Avalanche, and you're in their environment using tokens on their network, whether that be stable coins or any other token that represents value. I go out to lunch with a friend. I pay for lunch. He sends me money via Venmo. Now I've got Venmo credits, but I need to get an Uber to the other part of town. Uber decided Avalanche was not the best fit for their application. They chose something like Polygon. So how do I use the value of that cryptocurrency that's natively on Avalanche on an application that's built on Polygon? Rubic would be that solution. So if both of the applications have Rubic, you'd be able to universally use any cryptocurrency within those applications the same way you would right now if you had linked a debit or an ACH checking account to any of the applications you currently use, like Venmo or Uber. So you'd be able to just take that value from that Venmo that app is built on a completely separate blockchain, and you'd be able to use that to pay for that Uber seamlessly. The entire point is to remove the complexity and the pressure that people feel from this new Web3 environment and make that transition for people as seamless as possible. It really, truly, people may not even know they're using Rubic, but they are. It's working on the back end, behind the scenes, facilitating this transfer of value between applications built on different blockchain networks.
It's a brilliant example. I appreciate you taking time to share it. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners now better understand the unique value here in the ways in which Rubic will change the Web3 environment. I want to talk to you a little bit more about this business-to-business strategy. That's unique. That's different. What are some of the challenges that you and the team are facing as you go out and try to interact with businesses and bring more of them into the Web3 space?
Well, it's a lot easier when you're working with projects that are already involved in Web3, or at least are exploring avenues on how to get involved in Web3. Traditional Web2 businesses are going to require more education at all levels for people to start understanding what's happening, what Web3 actually is, how all of this technology works, and why it's beneficial for them as a business and for their users. So I think, we do have an uphill battle here in terms of making people feel comfortable and making people feel at ease when it comes to this stuff. I was recently in San Francisco, and somebody worded it in a way that I thought was not only very true, but it was pretty funny, that collectively as an industry, we have moved away from crypto and cryptocurrency and blockchain. We're not really using those terms very much anymore, at least on a public facing side of things. We have collectively and just kind of serendipitously rebranded as Web3. Now, Web3 is much less abrasive than a word like crypto, where it could have some negative connotations associated with it. So I think, again, really focusing on educating people on what Web3 is, and especially businesses, is going to make it a lot easier to have conversations about how this is going to be beneficial. But it's still so early. There are very few legacy businesses in the world that are really taking this seriously. It's still very speculative at this point for them. So again, I think education is probably our biggest hurdle at this point in time.
I want to talk a little bit more about this in the context of onboarding more Web2 companies into Web3. When we were preparing and talking, we spoke about the fact that part of what Rubic was doing was proactively trying to onboard Web2 companies into Web3. And I bring it up because sometimes when you position Web2 against Web3, it is adversarial. And some people frame it as a winner-take-all environment. And then there's others who have been on the podcast that talk about an environment where Web2 and Web3 coexist and both can thrive. But in this particular case, we're talking about something a little more nuanced. We're talking about onboarding Web2 companies into Web3. What can you share about that initiative and some of the things you're trying to do there?
Well, I think it's important to recognize and analyze the industry, right? There are some Web2 businesses that benefit from having a centralized solution. And it would be not pointless. I don't want to use the word pointless, but rather of benefit to no one to try to change a Web2 business's model that is not conducive to their users or them as a business. I think it's important to identify what businesses can benefit from a Web3 decentralized environment from a company overhead point of view and potential revenue streams coming in from their users, and then isolate those different businesses and approach them in a way that they're able to understand the vision, because this is not something that is going to take place over a year or 2 or 5 or even 10. This is a long-term vision, because very similar to the internet back in the early to mid 90s, right? It would be hard to paint the picture of where we are today in 2022 to a business in 1995. I think it's important to keep that in mind. I think giving that context to people, because we are having 2 very close revolutions in mankind's history happen pretty much almost right on top of each other, right? We had the communication revolution with the internet, and now we're having the financial and data revolution thanks to that revolution. And to really put it in context for people so that they can make good decisions for their business and good decisions for their users that put them in a position to succeed and thrive in the 2030s and the 2040s. So I think that's something that, all companies that are trying to work with Web2 or legacy businesses should really take that approach and that angle, because this is not just a quick turnaround. This is a long-term transition, and this new system of accounting will be with us forever moving forward. So I think it's important to be methodical and in the approach to the transition, and to not just jump in because it's the new hot thing, or to jump in just because you feel social pressure from your peers in the same space. I think a calculated approach by a lot of these businesses is going to be the best solution for them and for their users.
As we see more Web 2 companies join Web 3, do you envision a future where some of those Web 2 companies rise up within Web 3 and become market leaders? It seems difficult to imagine, but I presume if Web 3 relaxes on this decentralization ethos, it's possible. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's one of those situations where it's adapt or die. I mean, maybe it's a little hyperbolic of me to say it that way, but not to impugn the reputation of this particular business, but I am going to use them as an example. Take Sears. When I was growing up, Sears was one of the premier big box stores. They put a catalog out every season. It was the thing to go through and circle for gifts and ideas on what you'd purchase for birthdays and holidays. And Sears did not make the push to have an online storefront. They kept the original store and that original mindset as we moved into the 2000s. And you saw the decline of that particular business over that time. And that gave rise to businesses that were definitely, I would say, trailing behind Sears in the 90s in terms of overall volume of sales. Places like Target, for example, that embraced having an online store, and they were able to thrive and then eventually surpass Sears in terms of popularity and revenue. So I think that's a good example of what may happen to some businesses who fail to adapt to a Web3 environment, and they stick in a traditional Web2 environment. So having said that, yeah, I absolutely do see some traditional Web2 companies making that transition faster and smoother than other businesses, and as a result, seeing much more success in the future than their competitors.
Rubic is obviously swimming in the DeFi space of the ocean here in Web3. How do you explain to people that aren't familiar with DeFi the advantages of DeFi versus traditional finance?
With DeFi, you are your own bank. You decide where you're going to invest your money. You're not leaving it up to a centralized entity to play with your funds. So it really gives you more control over how you can make your money make money for you. That's a tricky question because normally, to be truthful, people aren't, your average person's not going to ask that question. So I guess I would phrase it like this. Why do I no longer need a bank? Isn't that unsafe? What do I do? That is, I think, probably going to be the question that the common person asks. And the answer is you don't need your bank anymore because we've built an environment that is permissionless and trustless. You are your own bank with decentralized finance, and you control where your money is stored. You control how your money is invested, and you're much more involved in the entire process while also removing a lot of the fees and middlemen from the entire experience. It's much more transparency with what's going on, and it's not, hidden from view behind corporate doors or some bank vault somewhere, right? So I think that is probably the way I would explain it to people, because I think when it comes down to it, people are going to want to know, why do I need a bank anymore?
We've discussed that Web 2 probably coexists with Web 3. How about DeFi and TradFi? Or is it a situation where DeFi eats TradFi?
I think there will always be a reason to have some centralization for certain business models, or to cater to certain individuals who just don't want to partake in, a new method of finance and communication. It's the same reason why some people to this day don't use email. They use faxes. They still use, I refer to it as snail mail, not email. So there's always going to be some niche part of society that will hold on to what they're familiar with. I think over time, traditional finance will eventually go away, but you'll see kind of an amalgamation of both traditional finance and decentralized finance, where you have major banking entities step into this DeFi space so that they'll offer insurance on your wallets, for example, the same way banks currently receive in the United States FDIC insurance on individual users' accounts. They'll step up and offer some type of insurance for your funds, because some people will not feel comfortable being in complete control over their life savings, and having that potentially get squandered in some type of theft or malfeasance somewhere. So I think that there's a way that traditional finance can adapt to a decentralized finance environment. But again, it's going to be up to those entities. But I do think it'll be a long, long time before we completely eschew traditional finance.
What are some big milestones or events coming up for the team at Rubic?
Oh, goodness. We have additional blockchain integrations. We have Hedera Hashgraph next on the docket in terms of blockchain integrations. We are working on expanding the adoption of our software development kit. So there are a bunch of different projects and businesses that we are talking to behind the scenes right now. I wish I could go into more detail, but these things are rather sensitive in terms of partnerships. And we are going to continue to expand the number of networks that we have as we progress through 2023. We're going to increase the number of automated market makers or liquidity providers, better known as decentralized exchanges, into our ecosystem. And we are also going to continue working with new bridge systems so that we are able to find more paths and more routes between those connected blockchain networks that are part of the Rubic ecosystem.
Hi, this is Collin with Rubic. If my conversation with the GRTiQ podcast has been helpful to you, then please consider supporting future episodes by becoming a subscriber. Visit grtiq.com graph.com/podcast for more information. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
GRTiQ.
Podcast.
Thanks for listening.
What's Rubic's view on a multi-chain future? It's a tricky question because it's to the benefit of Rubic, I imagine, that there's a bunch of networks, therefore increasing the value of the solution. But there's also people in the space that think that at some point there's a consolidation and maybe there's fewer chains in the future. Where do you come in on that?
Well, as of right now, I believe there are around 150 different major blockchain networks that currently have, live mainnets, live networks. I definitely see a consolidation happening in the future over the course of this decade. I am big on the rule of three. So there will be, two major competitors that are fighting for the same niche space in the industry with a distant third place. Now, these two main competitors and the distant third, they will fall into those positions due to a number of reasons, whether it be, geographic popularity, cultural popularity, network effect in general. And there will be different blockchain networks that are part of those groups of three that excel in different things, right? So you'll have some networks that excel at data management. You'll have other networks that excel for payment methods because they are able to process a high volume of transactions per second. You'll have some networks that are great for NFT minting and generation. And you'll have other networks that are good for streaming data or for playing games. Those will attract certain applications to their environments, and those will become known for dealing with those different aspects of, what those apps require, right? So data management, payment processing, data streaming, etc. I don't know how many there will actually end up being, but if I were to venture a guess today, I would say somewhere in the ballpark of around 24 or so major networks that will be, highly utilized in all these different niche areas globally when the dust settles and the consolidation is almost complete.
You've brought up data quite a bit during this conversation. I know it's an important issue for you, but it's also a central issue of Web3. How do you think the graph fits into this important topic of data?
I'm glad you asked. Where would we be today without Google, without Yahoo, without the major search engines that we use to, query and parse through all the information that's available to us? It's a rhetorical question. We would not be very far. The internet would still be disjointed, and good information would be buried and inaccessible. When Tim Berners-Lee talked about his idea for the internet, it was a place where you could go to find any information and then at a later time go back and be able to find that same information again. So without something like that, without something like a search engine, a query and indexing system to be able to find things across the internet, it would not be possible to be where we are today. And I think the graph is going to represent that, but for Web3. So to be able to find data and find information spread across a multitude of blockchain networks, buried in applications, buried in websites, built on Web3, there needs to be a way to be able to access that information reliably and do so continuously into the future. And I think the graph is building something that is going to enable that, really kind of keep that important structure in place.
So, Collin, does Rubic currently use the graph, or what's the plan there?
Currently, Rubic does not use the graph, but we do have future plans to expand the scope of the Rubic platform and our software development kit to include additional features. And one of those will be tapping into oracles, signals, and indexing, like with what the graph is doing. So we hope to be able to incorporate the graph into what we are doing. And I know that there has been some talk between Rubic and the graph on this front. And other than that, I can't share much more information, but it is part of our future plans to expand Rubic into something that is built for enterprise, built for businesses.
So, Collin, we've reached a point now where I'm going to ask you the GRTiQ 10. These are 10 questions I ask each guest of the podcast every week to help listeners learn something new, try something different, or achieve more. So are you ready for the GRTiQ 10?
Yes, I am.
The GRTiQ 10.
This is the way.
10 questions for astronauts floating in space.
This is the way.
Collin, what book or article has had the most impact on your life?
I would have to say Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. That definitely tapped into my sci-fi curiosity and a vision of mankind's future in terms of how we structure our society as a potentiality. But I loved the way that book was written, and I think I was 11 or 12 years old when I read it the first time, and it blew my mind. It was one of the few books that I went through and I read twice more without picking anything else up.
Is there a movie or a TV show that you recommend everybody should watch?
Yeah, I think one of the finest pieces of cinematography in history is the Lord of the Rings trilogy. So, Fellowship of the Ring, Two Towers, and Return of the King, the extended editions, of course. I think that those are masterpieces that won't be rivaled in our lifetimes.
If you could only listen to one music album for the rest of your life, which one would you choose?
Oh, goodness. That's a really tough one, man. That's a really tough one. That would probably be Sublime. Just Sublime. The album from 1996. What I Got is one of my favorite songs of all time.
What's the best advice someone's ever given to you?
I once, when I was working in an international sales job, I once had a gentleman ask me very sincerely how much money I would feel comfortable making to, make all my dreams come true, essentially, right? To live comfortably, realistically, right? And he was being sincere in his question. And I said, I don't know, $250,000 to $300,000 a year. And he looked at me with such incredulity and said, "That's all you think of yourself? You could do a lot for a lot of people. This isn't just about you, right? You can provide for your family, your friends, your community, and you're capable of more than that. Think more highly of yourself." And that was profound to me at the time, because I wasn't thinking about it like that. I was thinking very selfishly about what I would need, what I would want. But when he put it in that context about being able to affect more than just my life, but the lives of those around me, resonates with me to this day.
What's one thing you've learned in your life that you don't think most other people have learned or know quite yet?
To really trust your gut instincts. Your brain and your heart can only take you so far. It's about listening to that voice in the back of your mind. Even though you feel strongly about something, or you're impassioned about something and emotions are running high, I think it's always important to really listen to that voice that may be nagging you, even that is going against the grain, because that's a part of you that's somewhere in your subconscious trying to shake your conscious by the shoulders, right? And I think that is it sounds really cliche to say. In my experience, you have that feeling, you hear that voice for a reason, and it's important when you do hear it, when you feel it, that you acknowledge it and even act on it. So that's I don't think a lot of people get to that point.
What's the best life hack you've discovered for yourself?
Oh gosh, there's a lot. My wife actually taught me a ton of life hacks, and it's really tough to put any one of them at the top. Here's a life hack for anybody who wears jewelry out there. All you need to take off a stuck ring, not soap, not lotion or anything like that. You just need a thread and some tape. Put that thread under the ring, wrap that thread around your ring or around your finger rather, like a corkscrew motion. Hold the end of that string, and then the part of the string you tucked under your ring, start pulling up on it, and that will get that stuck ring right off. There's a lot of people out there who, get their ring stuck, their fingers will swell, et cetera, and that's I think a really helpful life hack. That way you don't ruin your jewelry either.
Based on your own life experiences and observations, what's the one habit or characteristic that you think best explains people finding success in life?
It's, again, going to sound very cliche, but working hard and having courage. You can only have courage when you do something even though you're afraid of failure, afraid of embarrassment, afraid of losing money or losing reputation. These are all things that great people, very successful people, all encounter. So you need to confront that fear, and you need to work hard when you do it. I think the combination of those two things will put you in a position to succeed. Not everyone can be a winner. That's just the nature of reality. Some people are going to be winners and others are going to be losers. But if you keep at it and you keep working hard and you keep confronting your fears, you will find success in your own way.
And then, Collin, the final 3 questions are complete the sentence type questions. The first one is, complete the sentence. The thing that most excites me about Web3 is...
The thing that most excites me about Web3 is the underlying technology and what it means to create new business models.
And how about this one? If you're on Twitter, then you should be following...
If you're on Twitter, then you should be following Elon Musk.
And then lastly, complete this sentence. I'm happiest when...
I am happiest when I'm with my wife and daughter.
The GRTiQ 10.
After this, I show you how deep the rabbit
Collin, if people want to learn more about you and the work that's going on at Rubic, what's the best way for people to stay in touch?
Absolutely. You're more than welcome to join us over in our Telegram channel at cryptorubic_chat. You can check out our website at rubic.exchange. You can find me on LinkedIn, Collin O'Brien. There are a lot of us out there, so it will help if you put Rubic in the search for me there. And we also have our Twitter as well, at CryptoRubic. You can follow us for all recent updates. We put out tweets every day about what we're working on. And then you can tune in both on Twitter and our Telegram channel on Friday mornings. I do a podcast where I cover all of our recent events, both in development and marketing, and routinely have guests on from different partners and people from around the industry to share their insights on current events and our partnerships.
This has been a production of the GRTiQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review.
GRTiQ
Podcast.